Okay, so we have applied the ACA ethical decision-making model to our case. It has 7 steps, and the very first step is to identify the problems within the case that is presented to you.
Some of the problems for this case could be personal for the counselor. It's stated that he has daughters of his own, and that he could see similarities between his daughters and Jenny, and it would be important for him to separate those. The case also states his views towards teen pregnancy and abortion, so he should be careful to realize what those are and then not to impose them onto Jenny. Some problems regarding Jenny herself could be her maturity level. It states that she's in an alternative school and that she's a 17-year-old sophomore, so perhaps she's been in trouble before or has made some poor decisions, which could be telling of her maturity level. He should also be aware for reasons Jenny has for not telling her mom about her pregnancy. Are they religious? Could she potentially get in more trouble at home? The case states that she has a stressful home life already, so is she scared of what may happen at home, or what those reasons are?
From the view of the counselor, it's important to take into consideration the school board policies regarding the issue at hand. So it would be important to know those policies, because if Michael chose to act in a way that is opposite of the policies, that could be really bad for him and his job, as well as Jenny as the student.
It's also important to know those too, because some school boards have a policy: if a student comes to you and they're pregnant, you have to inform their parents, no matter what. So in those cases, he wouldn't have to go through all of these other steps. Mm-hmm. So it'd be important to know that.
Okay. A possible legal problem that you could have is, does the counselor have to inform the parents of Jenny's pregnancy regardless of if she has an abortion or not? That would be something that's really important to know and understand. Also, the laws for pregnancy and abortion change from state to state, so it doesn't really state it doesn't say what state Michael and Jenny are in. But in the state of Georgia, if a minor gets pregnant and chooses to go through with an abortion, the minor's legal guardian has to be informed, and the minor has to receive permission to go through with the procedure. Also, some ethical problems that could arise: should the counselor tell the parents about the pregnancy? The counselor should be sure not to impose his own beliefs onto Jenny, since it has been stated in the case that he doesn't agree with teen pregnancy. And also, it's really important that Michael separate his views of his daughters. He views that separately than his view of Jenny. That he doesn't take it personal, that he's able to separate his life from his workload and his client. To help us kind of be clear on what to do, we've applied some ethical codes to the case. And some of the codes come from the ACA code for school counselors, and some codes come from the ACA code. The first one I will read, and it's from the ASCA code, and it states that counselors should inform individual students of the purpose, goals, techniques, and rules of procedure under which they may receive counseling. Disclosure includes the limits of confidentiality in a developmentally appropriate manner. Informed consent requires competence on the part of the students to understand the limits of confidentiality, and therefore can be difficult to obtain from students of a certain developmental level. First and foremost, it's most important that informed consent be talked about. It doesn't really state if it was talked about, but Jenny may not understand what could possibly break confidentiality in a session. So that would be important, because it could completely kill the rapport that they have going. And also it talks about relating it in a developmentally appropriate manner. As Andrea said, Jenny is in an alternative school and she's a 17-year-old sophomore. That suggests that maybe she's made irrational decisions before, or that she may not be developmentally where she should be in school. The next code that we talk about is ACA code B2D, that states, to the extent possible, clients are informed before confidential information is disclosed and are involved in the decision-making process. When circumstances require the disclosure of confidential information, only essential information is revealed. This will be important because, excuse me, if Michael does have to inform Jenny's parents, Jenny needs to know beforehand, because she could face possible backlash from her parents, and it would be important that she know. Also, it's important that she be involved in the decision-making process and what happens, because this is her and this is her body and her baby. So, you know, she should have a choice in what happens, or at least a say. The next code that we added is from the ACA code, and it basically talks about how Michael has a duty to Jenny as his client and also to Jenny's parents, since Jenny is a minor. And it is very important to try to balance the responsibility and balance the legal and ethical considerations that all apply to the case. The next one that we talked about is from the ACA code, and it states that counselors should respect students' values, beliefs, and cultural background, and do not impose the school counselor's personal values on students or their families. This one is really important because it already states that he disagrees with the situation. So it's important that he keep himself in check as to not impose what he believes onto Jenny to, you know, persuade her decision or, you know, weigh on it in any way. It's her decision from her family and her culture instead of his. Also from the ASCA code, counselors should be knowledgeable of the laws, regulations, and policies relating to their student and strive to protect and inform students regarding their rights. This is really important because it states in the case that he's not really sure of the laws that apply, and like I said, it does differ from state to state. So it would be very important that he do his research and find out what applies to them in their state, to their school, and so forth, and to tell Jenny so that she knows her options are available. And the last code is from the ACA code, and it says that counselors should take reasonable steps to consult with other counselors or related professionals when they have questions regarding the ethical obligations or professional practice. Since Michael is kind of confused and it says that he has an emotional reaction when Jenny is speaking with him, it would be very wise of him to consult maybe a supervisor or a colleague, so that maybe he could go forth and have some, you know, advice or guidance on the matter.
Okay, and step 3 is to determine the nature and dimensions of the dilemma. As counselors, we want to consider the moral principles of autonomy, non-malfeasance, beneficence, justice, and fidelity. For this case, we thought autonomy was a big one. Of course, as counselors, we want our clients to make their own decisions and be in charge of their own lives. But as we've talked about before, is Jenny mature enough to make rational decision about her pregnancy or to get an abortion? Is she mature enough to make the decision if her mother should know and why she doesn't want her mother to know? Along with this, Michael should help Jenny he should show her all of her options, help her think through these options, let her know the consequences of each one so that she could make a rational decision if he determines that she's mature enough. Beneficence is also a big one. As counselors, we want to be proactive to help her make this decision, but at the same time, we want to make sure that no harm falls to her or her family or her unborn baby, regardless of the decision. And finally, fidelity. Of course, we want our clients to trust us, and we don't want to do anything to break our rapport and trust with our clients. So Michael may be worried that if he told Jenny's parents, she wouldn't trust him anymore. He could also be worried that if he broke her trust and she told other people at school, he could lose trust and rapport from other students who haven't come to him but maybe wouldn't in the future. But he should work with her to find a balance between just telling her mother, working with her to find ways that she could tell her or to come to some sort of agreement about what would be best for this situation. And step 4 is to generate potential courses of action. Of course, one thing he could do would be to inform Jenny's mother about her pregnancy without speaking to Jenny about it first. But if he does this, like I just said, he could lose Jenny's trust in him as well as other students at this school. And he could also, if he's not following school board policy or other things, his reputation could be ruined just more than with students, but with other people, teachers, and his supervisors at the school. He could meet with Jenny again, like it says in the case. He wants to talk to her more about all of her options. He could explain all of those to her and try to get her to tell her mother herself, which in our opinion would be the best option. That way he keeps the trust, but Jenny is taking responsibility for her situation and is telling her mother herself. I think this is also important because just from the case, we don't have a good enough understanding of what the entire situation is, what's going on. So he would need to talk to her more to determine the best course of action. At this point, we don't think that he has enough information to really make a decision on what to do next. He could also determine that Jenny is mature enough to decide on her own what's best for her. Again, he would have to meet with her more to determine where she's at. We talked earlier about the alternative school and 17-year-old sophomore, but those could be from her past. It doesn't necessarily have to do with where she's at now and the decisions she's making now. So she could very well be mature enough to make these decisions on her own. If he determines that she is mature enough, then this would be an ethically and legally sound option to take. Finally, he could tell principal or another supervisor at the school about her case and let them decide what to do. However, if he does this, he is not only relinquishing his duty as a counselor and an advocate for Jenny, but he would also lose her trust in this scenario as well. Michael should determine with Jenny what's best for her because that's his job. And then step 6 is to select the course of action you decide is the best. For us, we would meet with Jenny again to figure out more about her situation and her maturity level. In one scenario, if she still didn't want to tell her parents for whatever reason, we would talk to her about this, why she doesn't want to do that, again, the religious reasons, or talk through those. Like Emily said, tell her about the law. She may not realize that in Georgia, to obtain an abortion, she has to have consent, which may persuade her to tell them on her own anyway. If that's what she truly wants, she would have to.
Or she could make a bad decision and not tell her parents and have an abortion the wrong way, and it could cause harm to her. Okay.
And along with that, in the law, if you can prove to a judge that you're mature enough to have an abortion without parental consent, that's another option she could take if we determined she was mature enough to do that. And if we felt like she was mature enough, we would give her all the options, let her know all of the laws. We could give her resources for support groups for teenagers who have abortions or teenagers who have a baby, for young mothers.
Pregnant teenagers, something like that, or a support line, maybe.
We could talk through all of these options, talk about all the consequences of each one, what would happen if she were to tell her mother, or happen if she didn't, how her life would change if she got an abortion or if she didn't. And then if we did that, ultimately we would have to let her make her own decision. We decided she was mature enough.
Right.
But also in that case, we would still be there for her for support if she changed her mind or decided there was something else she wanted to do. But within the ethical decision-making model, we decided with these courses of action, we would treat any other student the same way. We would also feel comfortable if this decision were to be made public, and that if any other counselor came to us with this dilemma, we would advise them in the same way. And so we came to the conclusion that this would be an ethically sound way to deal with the situation.
Mm-hmm.